Salam alaikum. So, part 3, Historicity of the Crucifixion. Welcome back, Hamza, Ijaz, Imran. Salam alaikum. So we'll see if we have any takers today. We'll be putting the link out in a second. How do you guys think last time went, maybe? Or I think, well, Hamza, you wanted to first start off and perhaps refreshing what the claims are, just so we can clarify.
Yeah, a little bit, because I think there was a little bit of confusion last time. When we set the challenge, we did say to the Christians, please watch part 1, so you know what we're talking about. And the Christians came on last time, and they hadn't watched part 1, and they were trying to go with the flow, and they were just coming to prove to us that the New Testament teaches a crucifixion. Okay, so just put things in perspective. We're not here today to challenge what the New Testament says, that there was a crucifixion or not. Okay, we believe the crucifixion is portrayed in the New Testament, in all the Gospels. Right, we have no issue with that. We know Paul spoke about it and whatever it may be. That's not what we're doing here. We're testing the historical claims of that New Testament. So we know the New Testament says it, and we're testing whether or not that matches what history teaches. Now, the reason we're doing this is because the Christians have this notion that because the Quran denies a crucifixion in this sense, that the Quran is on the wrong side of history, that the Quran is historically incorrect, because the New Testament and the Church Fathers and all of these non-Christian sources and these Bar Ehrman and all of these other sources all support the historical reality of a crucifixion. Okay. Yes. So what we did, if you haven't watched part 1, we challenged the claims of Josephus, we challenged the claims of Tacitus and Lucius. We looked at what does the actual New Testament say. We looked at the discrepancies. We looked at how certain events seem unhistorical due to the fact that they will go against Jewish law. These are the things that we're dealing with here. So if you're going to come on, and you're invited to come on, no problem at all. But please, don't come and tell us how the New Testament teaches crucifixion. Yeah. That's my 2 pence.
Yeah.
So it's kind of sticking to the... Go on, Ijaz.
Yeah, so if I just may add a little bit on to that, I really enjoyed last week's session, and I enjoy even more so the very first session. And it seems as if those that did come to interact with us, you're right, as you rightly said, Brother Darren, they didn't seem to understand the claims that we had made in the first video. So to be clear, you will see that the title of this video was the historicity of the crucifixion. That's the key word, historicity. So we're not here to challenge you on whether or not you believe the crucifixion happened. We believe that you believe that the crucifixion happened. In the same way that we believe it did not happen, or at least not in the way that you believe it happened. And so when we look at the word historicity, that's our focus today. So we encourage our Christian friends to come on. But just to be clear, and I hope the moderator agrees with me here, we need individuals to speak on the topic. If your topic is what do the Hadith say or what does the Quran say, that's not the topic. The topic, as we addressed in the first video, is not based primarily on our Islamic beliefs. So we don't need the Quran to deny or approve the crucifixion in this case in regards to our conversation today. We can come to this conclusion independent of the Quran. The Quran, alhamdulillah, just happens to affirm it. So I just wanted to make that distinction, inshallah. And I look forward to the Christians coming on and having a wonderful, peaceable chat with us.
Inshallah.
So if I could just make it easier for the Christians in the interaction. So if I'd ask you, Brother Ijaz, what would the Christians have to do to demonstrate? So this is really, I'm asking you to give the Christians the answer.
Yes.
What would they have to do to demonstrate that the crucifixion was a historical event? What would they have to bring as evidence? What could they do in terms of trying to bring evidence?
So that's brilliant. And I'm happy that you actually asked that. So they would need to contend with us on the historical testimony and evidence for the crucifixion event itself. So there are some Jewish sources, there are some Christian sources, and there are some general historical sources, Tacitus and Josephus and Lucian. So what we're asking them to do is list for us the sources that you think fully validate your view of the crucifixion, and then using the principles of historiography, or perhaps even archaeology, if you have archaeological evidence, one of those 2 fields and those methods, you use that, and you convey to us that no, what your understanding of how historiography works is not right, and therefore the crucifixion will not make sense to you in light of these historical evidences, because you're misapplying the methods when it comes to understanding if history happened in one way or not, or another way altogether. So to put it simply, engage with us on the more academic level, but as Brother Darwin will normally do, he might simplify it. But we want you to, because you have to look at it as all of us here are Muslims. We do not believe the crucifixion happened. When you come on this platform, we're not asking you to argue with us or quarrel with us. You should have it in your heart that you're here to convince us, show us that our position is less reasonable and that your position is more reasonable. I think that is what they have to do. And I think that has not been done as yet. And I hope my voice sounds beautiful, because alhamdulillah, we've got a new mic, because last week apparently no one could hear me. This week, inshallah, I hope you hear my beautiful voice wherever you are in the globe. Please subscribe to EF Dawah's Patreon, give them a like and a share as well. And if you're not a subscriber, shame on you. Subscribe today, inshallah, and let's get the show on the road, inshallah.
I mean, just to quickly add, just to answer as well to Imran, what Imran asked, it's a fair question. All we're basically saying to the Christians is, we did part one. We made some claims. If those claims are true, then there's no historical support for the crucifixion. If those claims are true, so all they need to do is say, you said this, and this is wrong because of this, and try and take away all of our claims. Because if they can't take away our claims, there's nothing they can do. There is no historical claim, and it's just a theological claim. And theology we can deal with, but like I say, I've allowed the New Testament to teach its message. So we're allowing that. We're not going to challenge it. We're not going to high criticism or anything like that. We're just looking at events as they are supposed to have occurred according to the New Testament Gospels. Do they make any historical sense? And we give so many reasons why they don't. And when we also challenge the claims of the Josephus and such, like I just said. And so all you need to do is come on and say, you said this about Josephus, actually you're wrong, and this is the truth about Josephus. And if that thing holds true, then we have to take that away from one of our claims. Yes. So all they have to do is refute our claims. If you can't refute our claims, then our position stands. You can't touch it. Yeah. As MC Hammer would say. I
think that's beautifully clarified by all three of you there. So hopefully, and I felt, I don't know about you guys, on the last stream, we had sort of a revert Muslim come on. We had some guy that was half Muslim, and we had some guy that was in bed who came. Was that? Would you guys say it was? We really were looking for Christians to be,
yes,
It
with respect.
has to be Christians. They're challenging what we've said, because we've said it clearly. The crucifixion is not historical, and here's why. And you're now responding to that, telling us the crucifixion is historical, and here's why. That's it. Yeah. A Muslim can't come on, and what's a Muslim going to come on and do? He's going to be preaching to the choir. It's got to be a Christian.
I think half the people that came on last time were Muslim, which was interesting. When obviously it's a challenge to Christians. I think just to be more productive, if we just have Christians on. Indeed. Nobody's yet come in, so they're obviously still getting clarification. No one's yet clicked the link.
I think one of the reasons why we get so many Muslims, even last time and even now probably, is that when Muslims and Christians interact, this is probably the most talked about topic. Because really, this is the difference between us. And so this is why it comes up every time. And often, and the reason for doing these sort of whole series of these now on this topic is that the Christians often make the claim that this is historical, and what you're going against is sort of, absolutely set in stone. There's no way you can, deny this thing from happening. And obviously, it's been demonstrated that actually that's not set in stone at all. In actual fact, it's ambiguous at best. And so this has been demonstrated by going through the different sort of various approaches that have been described to you. And this is really what we would like now is for Christians, and this is really for the Christians to help us to come to their understanding that this is historical. Mm-hmm. So please come forward.
Look, for example, Mr. Kish in the comments said it is set in stone. Right. So Mr. Kish, come on down.
I gotta say something at this point, which is I'm a Muslim. Right, and I've been told all my life that the Quran gets the crucifixion wrong. I've been told as an adult that Muslims don't understand the mountains of evidence, as one recent Christian I spoke to put it in, mountains of evidence. And I asked him one question. Well, okay, you've said mountains your entire life, mountains of evidence. Can you name me 3 things that are included in this mountain of evidence? And he stopped and he thought about it. He said he would get back to me. He mentioned the Gospels and he said Josephus. He came back the next day to add on Tacitus. And I said to him, that's brilliant, but you promised me a mountain. What you've given me are 2 or 3 generally obscure references, right? And he generally agreed. He said, okay, I'll bring back more for you. He comes back and he adds on Lucian. And I say to him, okay, that's brilliant, but where's the mountain? And so we're not trying to be facetious. We're not trying to mock anyone. But I think what has happened is there's a mismatch between what is repeated and what is actually there before us.
Exactly.
So they've repeated the mantra, mountains of evidence, you can't question it. But the brilliant things about having a mountain of evidence and having scholars behind you is that you have 4, not very genius people on a live stream. You have everything behind you supporting you. You should be able to come here and say clearly, this is why you are wrong. And it's curious because Darwin has been challenged by many Christians, so have I. And the one time we give you all the opportunity to say, come on freely, publicly, and correct us, we're not getting the same people who regularly challenge us. And I found that quite peculiar. So either it is there's a problem with the question that we're asking, or perhaps it is we've asked a question to which there is no really good answer to it. And I think the latter seems to be the case.
Almost definitely. We know that.
We have go on, Imran. After you, Imran, then we have someone.
So I just really wanted to sort of set the tone for as the reason why we're doing this. So we spoke about the approach, but really this is really about mutual understanding. This is about respect. We'd like everyone who's in this sort of. I've seen a few comments from the moderators saying, "Please be respectful." We have to be respectful towards each other, and really we're trying to learn from each other. The point we're trying to establish as Muslims here is that the crucifixion is not historically tenable. And that's our position. But really, we're trying to do this in a respectful way. There's no sense of mocking or trying to belittle people. We're trying to help our greater understanding. So if everyone can go forward with that spirit, that would be appreciated.
God willing, indeed. And I want to echo what he said.
Okay, we do have someone in the chat. I mean, after what we just said, he's not Christian and doesn't speak good English.
So I think we'll pass over. We'll skip over that because we want people to understand
a challenge for Christians, right? So we'll keep. We need some Christians, so we'll keep putting the link out there.
So one thing that we see on other channels, and this is often when you get people who represent themselves as ex-Muslims. They'll get someone on who doesn't speak very well, can hardly articulate their position, and they're presented as Muslims who are suddenly, become whatever, atheist or Christian or whatever that might be. That's not our aim. So with all due respect to the person who wanted to come on, if you can't speak in a way that people understand, and you're not even Christian to start with, then you haven't got a horse in the race. So wish you all the best with that. But that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to accurately represent the views of Christians, which is why we want Christians to come on and please represent yourselves.
I don't want it, and just to echo Dr. Imran, I keep saying brother, I'm not sure why, but he is a brother to me, but he's also a doctor of love. Let me just mention that. So I do love him, alhamdulillah. So yeah, normally other channels would look at that individual who volunteered themselves and jump and give him a spotlight. But our goal is not to mock or to speak down to anyone. And we want to have real, actual conversations with reasonable people. And we don't want to have anyone to have a disadvantage. And I can tell you, when I was with EF Dawa at the park, there was actually a process we went through. Can this person understand what we're saying? Can they be understood? Are they lewd or vulgar? Are they reasonable? Are they just going to storm off during mid-conversation? Are they going to scream or shout? So we try to have reasonable people on camera because it would be far too easy to put all the angry and irrational people just to get views. But the goal is not YouTube views. The goal is dawah for the sake of Allah. And that's why today I'm on EF Dawah. And I'm happy to be here with these 3 sometimes beautiful brothers. Inshallah, may Allah guide them to Chelsea. We ask that Allah guides them into Shriek.
We have someone?
No, not yet, but we have a question from Abbas, so we may as well. Once someone comes in, says, "Is Hamza eating chocolate trifle on a live stream?"
No, he's eating homemade cheesecake.
It's a cheesecake, Abbas. There you go.
I do want to add here that I've only ever seen once where Hamza has gotten like resoundingly defeated, and it was quite a shock to me. And I'm sure Hamza would agree that he was
Don't go to
defeated
the
in this
football, please.
Was it a Brexit? Was it a Brexit debate?
I'll tell you, we went to,
That guy
the
there.
sanctuary of sanctuaries, and you would not believe, Darwin and I are pretty young men. We love football. We live and breathe football. Clearly, I'm wearing a very beautiful shirt, as Darwin would agree. But what surprised us was that Dr. Imran blindsided us completely. He actually demolished us to our faces. And I remember looking at Darwin, because Darwin had been going on all day. I've got a really powerful shot. He has all the power, but little accuracy.
We might have a Christian coming on. His name is Elijah.
Okay.
I met this guy kind of online yesterday. He's Lucky. He's some kind of, I think he met him actually through his aunt. And I was basically, Lucky put a status up that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. And his aunt in response posted a link saying that Christianity is the biggest religion, as if the two have anything to do with each other, right? So I just basically said, well, to be honest with you, the Catholics don't recognize themselves as Christians, and the Protestants don't recognize Catholics as Christian anyway. So you can't really say they're all the same. But even if you could, it means nothing anyway. But anyway, Elijah was on my side against his aunt, saying Catholics are not Christians and all of this, right? So we didn't speak about Islam. We spoke about Christianity. But he's a bit of a Bible thumper. He said he was going to use the sword of the book on the aunt. So he may be coming on.
He's here now, Hamza. So I'll bring him on.
Perfect.
Welcome, Elijah. Welcome to the stream. Can you hear us, Elijah? I don't know if you're not on mute.
I can't hear him.
I think he's frozen.
Hey, there he is.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, let's give him a sec to see if it buffers.
I think he's in the US, so I don't know if that makes a difference with the.
Yeah, Elijah, can you hear us? All right. Are you guys hearing him? I'm not hearing anything.
I don't hear anything. No, it seems to be frozen to me.
Yeah, I think maybe Elijah, if you've got better internet somewhere, it may be worth trying to come back on with. And
you can even come on without the camera, because sometimes.
Good point. Good point. Just come on and say there's a stop cam option, and just come on with a voice. All right, we'll see if we can get Elijah back on.
God willing. But like I said, it's really interesting that Christians who are coming on, their cameras don't work, their microphones don't work, they don't speak good English. Where are the rest of them that do have working cameras and do speak good English?
Where's James White?
Where's Jonathan McClatchy? I heard
where's Sam Shimon? Where's David Wood?
Can't find them. Don't know where they are. They were a lot like.
Where's Chris Klaus?
Oh my goodness.
Where's Stephen Atkins?
I got to tell you, Chris Klaus, I had an interaction with him the other night, and he made a comment. If I could just mention it here, the comment was, unless Ijaz apologizes to me about something, I forget what, no major Christian will debate him. And I stopped and I said to myself, which major Christian has told me he doesn't want to debate me? Because every day, Allah is my witness, almost every day I get challenges. And I don't know anyone who doesn't want to debate. I recall that I had an interaction with a certain builder from Speaker's Corner on another video very recently. He made a claim about textual criticism. I responded with references. No response to that. He responded to every other comment except the one in which I put references and responded to him. So where are these guys, subhanAllah? When the Quran says, indeed, the haqq has come and falsehood has vanished. That is the truth. Brothers, please, if you're in the chat, share the link. We want reputable, credible, intelligent, reasonable Christians that can respond to us. And
the other thing actually is very interesting. It may be the situation like we had with this claim about 5,000 manuscripts proving evidence, and then when this was sort of looked into in detail, all of these are late. I mean, there's nothing in the first couple of centuries, 3 centuries, and everything else is very, very sort of late. And I think that argument now has become less and less popular. We don't really see that very much. And it might be that this is one of those things about the historicity of the crucifixion that has been sort of peddled a lot. And actually, the vast masses of the Christians accept this without having actually looked into it. And it might be that they're having difficulty in responding, which is reasonable, which is fair enough, which is what we'd expect from our perspective. So although we're saying reputable academics, we really want the people who make this claim to come forward. But if you're in the sort of comments and you've always believed this, it would be useful to know sort of why you believe it. If you want to come on and say, look, I've been told this and this is what I've done, and then you can give us your response to the things that we've presented. Were you aware of the fact that Josephus is so late and his work, for example, is written is disputed in terms of what was said, and all of the other sort of things that we've looked at in terms of historicity? By all means, come. I mean, we're not horrible. We're here to have discussion, and we're really here to try and sort of educate and learn as well. If you got something to teach us on this topic, this is what we're really here for. Yeah. So if you're the people who are making the claim are not coming forward, then feel free to come forward and discuss with us, please.
Indeed. So a lot of
because here's the thing, you see. If there's no historical support for the crucifixion, the crucifixion is the fundamental part of Christianity. Without a crucifixion, there can be no resurrection. So if there's no historical support, all you've got left is the theological support. And that will be our next agenda. So right now, we're just dealing with the history here. Yeah. When we start challenging the actual theology, that's when you're going to have big, big problems. Right now, we've made it so easy for you. This is the thing. Yeah. There's so much evidence, so much things in history. What's do I keep hearing? It's the most attested thing or something in history. Yeah, the crucifixion of Jesus occurred. I mean, come on. The Christians reach out to Bart Ehrman to support them in this cause. Look, even Bart Ehrman agrees. Come on. It can't be that hard.
If people have, like you just said, if people can share it amongst, if you're in any Christian groups, share it. Say the Eve Tower guys are put out a challenge.
Because just to be clear, they've had 2,000 years to collect the evidence and develop the science behind the history behind it. So, 4 lads on a YouTube stream should not be this difficult to respond to. And just to settle something, a lot of people tend to think that we sit down and we're not actually studying and reading. So here is a lovely book I've been reading from an atheist, a rule book for arguments, and I found it to be brilliant. Look how small it is. It's a handy, nice resource. You can read this in about half an hour and walk away with much stronger, robust arguments. I got this one yesterday with my mic, alhamdulillah. A concise guide to New Testament textual criticism by a Christian. So we're reading from your sources. We don't sit down and go on Google and say anti-Christian explanations or reasons as to why the crucifixion didn't happen. We're sitting down and we're reading from your sources because we want to deal with you reasonably and fairly. We don't disagree out of spite or hatred, but out of reason primarily and revelation. Brother Jordan, is there anyone in the chat?
There's no one at the moment. So
I can see Chris is in the comments.
Yeah, we've got comments and we've got 5 dislikes on the video. So there's no point in just disliking it.
I think the dislikes came before.
There's no point disliking it and then just going. Jump on. And yeah, we've actually got someone in the chat, and then we've got Mary here. So
okay.
I will assume Mary is a Christian. Let's see.
I hope so.
Welcome, Mary.
Hi, Mary. Can you hear us?
Can you hear us, Mary?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Hello, Mary.
Can you hear me?
Hello, Mary.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. Yes, I can.
Mary, I think you've got a YouTube link. You've probably got a couple of links open. If you close one of them, because we can hear echo back.
Okay, well, just give Mary a second to figure it out.
Yeah, hold on. I may have to. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, you're very clear. You're very clear.
Is that all right? Okay.
The problem is, Mary, there's we echo back, so I think you must have a couple of tabs open, maybe, or an extra YouTube one. When you come into StreamYard, you can then close your YouTube tab.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Let me. Yeah, hold on a second. Let me do that. Let's see.
Reminds me of a Abbas's internet, that sound.
Say that again, Brother John.
Reminds me of Abbas's internet, that sound.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, much better.
Yeah, much better,
okay?
Mary.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I just want to make 2 points.
Okay.
One of which is the Jewish Mishnah. And I want to read to you a statement from that set of writings. If you know much about it, you probably would know that the Jewish rabbis preceded Islam, all of the prophets and so forth in Islam, in terms of the oral tradition. So we know that the Jewish rabbis actually memorized every part of their religious books, in addition, of course, to their Bible, to the Old Testament. But anyway, that they went ahead and they were the somewhat of the originators. They preceded Muslims, by a great number of centuries in terms of memorization of their books. So I'm going to read you a passage here, but I want to precede it by telling you that knowing quite a few Jews, I have yet to run into any Jew who denies the crucifixion. And I have always found that to be very interesting. I think, though, that one of the reasons for that is while they tend to be looked at a lot differently than Christians, because we're not that interested in what the Jews write or wrote in their sacred texts, simply because they're not pro-Jesus as Savior. But on the other hand, they're definitely anti-Jesus as Messiah. And so let me just read what it says. On Sabbath Eve and the eve of Passover, of course, this is written in Hebrew, Passover, Jesus the Nazarene was hanged. Wait, I'm reading this. And a herald went forth before him 40 days, heralding Jesus the Nazarene is going forth to be stoned because he practiced sorcery and instigated and seduced Israel to idolatry. Whoever knows anything in defense may come and state it. But since they did not find anything in his defense, they hanged him on Sabbath Eve and the eve of Passover. Ulla said, "Do you suppose that Jesus the Nazarene was one for whom a defense could be made? He was a Meshit, someone who instigated Israel to idolatry, concerning whom the merciful God says, show him no compassion and do not shield him." With Jesus the Nazarene, it was different, for he was close to the government. So that I just wanted to present that one angle as being a historical document, but I wanted to just make one more point. What precedes and actually shoves away every bit of anything historical, and I'm speaking especially to Ijaz, but more so to Hamza, is faith. Faith is the reason I cannot believe in Islam. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Can I just respond very quickly? I was reading about this today. I'm just trying to find exactly where I read it in this book, right? About the Mishnah, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And you just said that's historical. But that said he was going to be stoned.
But at what?
It said the herald said for 40 days he's done sorcery, he's done this, and he's going to be stoned and then hung on the gibbet. Yeah. So do you believe it's historical that Jesus was stoned?
No.
But you just quoted this as historical.
No, because if Jesus, you have to consider what court actually tried Jesus. It wasn't even the Sanhedrin.
Wasn't it?
No, it wasn't. It was the high priests.
Right. Let me ask you the question again. So I think you misunderstood my question. Mary. You just quoted the Mishnah as if it's historical. And that says he's going to be stoned 40 days prior. So this is 40 days in advance of his death, right? And we don't see this. So if this is historical, you believe Jesus was stoned. If you don't believe Jesus was stoned, well, then this is not historical then.
No, you have a very strange argument there, Hamza. And let me tell you why that is.
Go on.
Because you are not understanding Jewish law, Roman law, and all of the pieces of the relationship that existed between the Jews and the Romans.
I'm reading about it
You
all day
need
today.
to study why Jews would be stoned and understand that that stoning in this case would not apply to Jesus. He was turned over to the Romans instead.
Sorry? You were saying, who told you that?
The Romans are the ones who actually carried out the crucifixion.
So who tried him?
He was tried first just by priests of the Sanhedrin. It
Right.
was 2 in the morning.
Okay,
When
but that
the-
was illegal according to Jewish law.
Pardon?
That's illegal according to Jewish law.
What's illegal according to?
You can't try somebody at night. You can't try somebody in secret.
They weren't trying him.
They weren't trying him.
No, the high priests were building their case as to what they needed to do in order to be able to do away with him. And that's where the Romans stepped in. Hamza, what was the reason Christians say he was crucified? Now, first of all, let me tell you, the real reason Jesus was crucified has nothing to do with all this historical crap. He was crucified for our sins.
Oh, that's just theology.
We all crucified Jesus.
Mary, no disrespect. Mary, we know what the theology is.
Yes.
Yeah, we know what you're right.
I don't think you do, but okay, go on.
Oh, we do. You believe Jesus was sacrificial lamb to atone for original sin. We know that. Okay. We're not arguing against that. We're arguing against, does history support what you're saying? So you quoted the Mishnah, right? So you quoted the Mishnah as if it was quoting history, that a herald for 40 days was saying this man is going to be stoned.
Yeah.
Right.
Why wasn't he stoned? Did anybody come forth from that?
But what was the herald saying he was going to be stoned? Okay. So what was the herald saying he was going to be stoned for?
The herald wasn't saying, the herald didn't say that. The herald was out looking. It wasn't the herald. What am I trying to say? We're not talking about a personal opinion of the herald. We're talking about who set it up behind the scenes. And what we're talking about are members of the Sanhedrin, some of the high priests, but certainly not the Sanhedrin itself. And the reason for that is because if Jesus really had been tried by the Jews, he would have been tried in an area, a building, in a room that was called the Hall of Stones.
I've been reading about it all day today. Yes, I know.
Okay, so my point is that in order to find him, to figure out a way, they interviewed Jesus and they determined that they needed to get rid of him in some way. It was Passover. They weren't going to commit their own sins to do away with Jesus. And so they had to find a different reason. The Romans crucified Jesus because he was a political threat. They were afraid of an uprising.
Who was more a political threat, Jesus or Barabbas?
Jesus was.
Barabbas was a rebel leader.
Jesus, where does it say that Barabbas was a rebel leader?
It doesn't have to say it in the New Testament, does it?
Does it say it there?
Or does it have to?
Well, of course, it says he was a thief.
No, it's just interpreted. Listen,
No.
That's
I'll
explain it to you. I'll explain it to you. The Romans don't.
You're throwing in lies. Why are you doing that?
I'll tell you why it's not a lie. Because the Romans didn't crucify thieves. They crucified rebels.
They didn't, but they crucified
Rebels.
people who were leading large insurrections. Why on earth?
Rebels.
Why on earth did the Romans come after Jesus in the garden?
They didn't.
If I may answer here.
with an incredible number of soldiers.
They didn't.
Why
If
did
you
they
read
do
it, it was
that?
guards from the temple. If you read it properly, it's guards from the temple.
Guys,
Should
do you
we
mind
get
if I-
Ijaz? Ijaz,
Yeah,
you want to
go on,
come in?
Ijaz.
Yeah.
Kind of
So-
I
off
find what I was
topic.
reading.
You're off topic there, but my point is that
What? And what?
you were off the topic there. But
I'm
my
on the topic. You said the Romans arrested him in the garden, and I said no. It was the Jewish priests and guards that arrested him in the garden.
But that's not the, you're interrupting me. The point I'm making is that it wasn't one soldier who came to arrest him.
It wasn't the Romans. It was
Why on earth would they come after one man with
they didn't.
section of the Roman army? Why?
They didn't. The Romans didn't come to the garden. The Jews did. That's why they took him to the house. Do you think the Jews had that power that they could take a prisoner off the Romans who was being arrested for insurrection? Come on.
You need to go
Mary,
back
do you
and
mind
read
if we
the
get
Bible.
Ijaz?
But my
Let me
point is
mute,
I presented my
Sorry, Mary, muted you for a bit. Ijaz, if you come on, Mary, you've been muted. I just want to hear what Ijaz has to say, and then I promise you, we'll get back to your point as well.
Indeed. So I just want to mention here, Mary, if you can hear me, in Mark chapter 15, verse 7. Now, a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the New Testament does mention him as a rebel. I have it here. I'm reading from the Greek New Testament here. So that would be Mark chapter 15, verse 7. Incidentally, I believe Tacitus actually mentions that the people were generally only sent to crucifixion for being rebels and committing high crimes. So he would not have been crucified for being a thief alone. So it has to be coupled in with at least one other charge, and it has to be rebellion. So I would disagree with you on that. Generally, though, I have to reject what the rabbis say, because if we presume that what they say is true, then Jesus, committed sorcery and he did idolatry, or at least he taught idolatry. I do not think that Jesus, the Messiah of God, would teach sorcery or idolatry. So I would question this statement. If the presumption is we should accept whatever the Jews say about him, do we take that position in what they say about his mother, for example? So just generally, I think what Hamza was trying to say was that your point, as you made it, contradicts the historicity of the event itself. Mary, you please feel free to respond. I don't mind you laughing, it's okay with me. So please engage with what I've said, if possible.
Yes. Well, Ijaz, you are totally off the point. The point you guys came on and said we're going to talk about is not about what the Jews said about Mary, and it's not about what the Jews said about Jesus. What you said the topic was proof, historical proof that Jesus was killed.
Crucified specifically. But Mary, then your point
and
becomes...
that is what the Mishnah says.
Okay, brilliant. But Mary,
Okay, that other stuff is off topic from what you said you're talking about.
Okay, so Mary, if just work with me, right? You're telling me that what the rabbis say is historically reliable, yes?
That's why she's quoting it.
Yes, and the other stuff about Mary and all that, that's...
So, no, but let's just pause there. So let's just pause there. So you're telling me it's historically reliable, we can trust what they say, but you don't trust it when they speak about Jesus in other areas, just in this one area. When we have to consider the reliability of a source, if they're mistaken in so many other places, how can you ask me to put my trust in one statement then, if the rest of what they've said you would necessarily disagree with? Can you help me work out the machinations of your thought there? Your thoughts?
Well, since you completely eliminate all the other sources, and those are not being spoken of within this context, my answer would be that there certainly was evidence for the Jews that Jesus that they killed Jesus. Just like I read about Muhammad and him going to heaven on a steed, and I don't see any historical evidence about that.
Just
and
to be
the
clear,
only one who writes about it was Muhammad. It
so-
isn't anywhere else. I mean,
just to be
come on, guys.
just to be clear, Mary, I think that's a bit of an equivocation, because Paul also said he went up to heaven,
You don't
2
like it.
Corinthians chapter 12. And no, I don't believe that you reject the historicity of that, right? So if Paul did it, Muhammad, peace be upon him, did it, that's irrelevant. We're focusing on the historical sources about Jesus, right? So the question I asked you still stands. If I can't trust the rabbis and what they say in the same work, mind you, from the 3rd century, then why should I trust everything else that they do say? You need to give me a reasonable argument in order for me to be convinced. I want to understand your position. I don't disagree with you because I dislike you, Mary. In fact, I think you're quite polite. May God reward you for being kind in your tone and cheerful. I appreciate that. So please help me. That's what I'm asking, because I am interested in seeing where you would like to take this.
Well, Jazz, I guess the only thing I could say is that my faith does not permit me to believe in Islam and to believe what it says in the Quran. And what I also know is that there's scripture in the Bible where it actually states that those who are Christians are chosen by God. Perhaps the reality, guys, is that none of you are chosen by God to be Christians.
Could I ask you a question, Mary, if that's okay?
Sure.
So I think so. Mary, you started off by saying that you were going to refer to the Mishnah,
Yeah.
and I just wanted to ask you that when was this oral tradition written down? When do we have our copies of these manuscripts of the Mishnah? When do they come to us?
It was all oral tradition. I believe it did not. They decided to write it when the Jews were expelled out of Jerusalem, out of Israel, and when they were dispersed all over the place to different locations. So I believe that is when the oral tradition actually became written. I'm not an expert. I don't have any YouTube channel on anything. I'm just an old woman.
I respect you, and I thank you for answering that. So the question then follows is, when the writings that we do have that come from the Mishnah, when are they from? So if you look at the manuscripts that we have.
Oh my gosh, when they began to write them down, they wrote down everything that, I don't know, I think it began in something like, was it the Book of the Law, I think was 500 years before Christ. And then it continued after that. That's when the Sanhedrin, the one that I'm referring to. I'm not that up to date on all of that kind of stuff. I would admit that that's not an area of big interest for me.
So the reason for asking the question is, and I think Brother Joss can correct me, is that when we're looking as a non-Christian looking at this, so I'm now looking at extra biblical evidence. Just being presented. One of the things I have to do is look at when these writings that we have come to us from, and as far as I can see, and I've sort of I've just done a very quick look to see, and really where I went to was the University of Cambridge Digital Library, and you can see the earliest copies of the Mishnah there. Maybe we can post a link, and they're dated from 470 Christian era, so that's the 5th century after Christ. So I think one of the things I have is actually this is extremely late after the event that we have the earliest manuscripts from, and maybe Brother Giles knows a little bit more about the manuscript dating. But then, if you look at that, then the Gospels themselves would be earlier than this, and even there is issues within the Gospels as well of how they present the events. But again, the events you're presenting are in contradiction to the events that you find even in the actual New Testament. So, for example, one of the things you said was that the Jews came to take Jesus from the garden, and it wasn't the Romans, but you see the disciples having weapons to try and fight off a group of people. And as far as I'm aware, these were, and I know Hamza's presenting a different picture, but as far as I'm aware, these were Romans that came to get him.
A cohort of 600 soldiers.
Sorry?
A cohort of 600 soldiers. Is what the New Testament says.
It depends on which gospel you read, to be honest.
Absolutely. So what we're finding is a sort of an inconsistency. So what I see is that the documents themselves are late. They're 5th century. The narrative isn't coherent with the New Testament narrative. And the question that you raised quite interesting was, why would the Jews write about this if it didn't happen? Well, I can give a very straightforward answer to that. And actually, it's from Ezekiel. The prophet that's killed is a false prophet, and this would be enough of a motivation in the eyes of those people who reject Jesus, because Muslims, we don't reject Jesus, peace be upon him, we believe him to be the Messiah sent to the Jews. In the eyes of the people who reject him, this would be a sufficient motivation to record somebody being killed. So for me, on 3 different points that it falls down. So the narrative isn't coherent. The motivation would be quite clear why to write this, and the manuscripts, as far as I'm aware, are quite late, for 5th century or later. So for those 3 reasons, I think the historicity isn't clarified or sufficient for me to accept it. But maybe Brother Giles knows more about the datings than I do.
I have one more angle, sorry. Going back to the Mishnah. Because the first thing we have to understand is that Jesus was a common name. So it could be referring to a different Jesus who was stoned and crucified. And I'm just reading, there was a Jesus Han-Nazio, or Jesus Ben Pandera, who existed before the historical Jesus we're referring to. So the Mishnah could be referring to that particular crucifixion. Because here's your problem with this, Mary. If it's historical, then Jesus would have had to be stoned. If he wasn't stoned, what we're talking about is either not historical or it's referring to somebody else. And I don't think it supports the crucifixion as Christians believe it is historically, looking at the evidence.
Okay, well, to each his own. I'd like to sign off and hear you interview some other people, which I guess are waiting to talk. I thank you for giving me this opportunity. And like I said,
coming on, Mary.
Isn't it all about faith, folks?
No.
Well,
for me.
faith is where it's at for me. Faith is, if you believe in God, you certainly have to have faith.
Well, it depends on your reasons, what you believe. Bye-bye.
Bye, Mary.
Mary.
So, brother,
So, we've got
continue.
John. Sorry, go on.
Brother Jordan. So, Dr. Imran, I actually checked, and it's the 15th century date of creation. So, the name has 470, but I just think that's the manuscript number. I'm reading from the Cambridge website, and it actually says.
We can post a link for that.
Yeah,
and I think it's important because this means that this is, millennia, over 1,000, 1,500 years after the event. And I think it's interesting that someone would have to go to such a late document to try and establish a narrative. Now, just before we carry on, Jordan, I'm just sending the link to someone to post to that manuscript.
Thank you, Doctor.
There is a mention of James in the Antiquities of Jesus as well. I'm probably you're aware of that.
Yes. Tonadelphon, Jesu, tu legomenu Christu, the brother of Jesus who is called Christ. And that's correct.
That's right. And again, we see the priests. What they did was they again tried him and turned him over again, and the form of punishment he was going to go for was to be stoned. So it fits with the thing that Hamza is presenting, that that text would have presented a stoning as opposed to a crucifixion as a form of
But the reality is there was Jesuses that existed before who were crucified and they were stoned.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. Who do we have?
So we have Jonathan is next. So welcome, Jonathan. Arul is also here. So Jonathan, if you put your claim first, and then we'll go from there.
Excellent. Well, great to be here, and thanks for taking me on. So, I was disappointed in watching the first video that you did on the crucifixion. That you spent a lot of time dealing with some of the secular historians, Tacitus, Josephus, when really that's not the meat and potatoes of the case for the crucifixion or the historicity of Jesus of Nazareth. In biblical scholarship, the meat and potatoes is, of course, the primary sources which we have in the New Testament. So I want to deal with one example from the New Testament, and that is in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which is one of the letters of Paul that he wrote from Ephesus in the early to mid-50s of the first century. And he says from verse 3 through 8, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me." And so when we're evaluating the historicity of the crucifixion question, we have to come to adjudicate how was it that Paul came to claim that Jesus had in fact been crucified? What best explains that fact? So the competing hypotheses, I think, which are on the table are that that Paul made it up, he deliberately lied about it, or that he was honestly mistaken, he'd received phony information, for instance, or that this is some later interpolation to the text. You'd have to make a case for that, or that in fact he claims it because Jesus really was crucified and indeed was raised from the dead. So which of these alternatives would you subscribe to? I mean, obviously Paul was someone who was personally acquainted with Jesus' brother James and with Jesus' closest disciple Peter, and so he was in a position to be in the know as to what was being claimed and asserted by Peter and James and the 12 apostles, etc. So how would you explain the origins of Paul's assertion of the crucifixion of Christ?
Jonathan, if you could just answer me briefly, what is the date for those manuscripts of 1 Corinthians 15 that you're appealing to?
Well, the book of 1 Corinthians was written in the early to mid-50s AD from Ephesus.
But what is the earliest manuscript that you have on that?
I don't know. I'm not a textual critic. I don't have that at my fingertips.
So P46 is from the 3rd century. I'm actually looking here in my NA 28, and some of the variants used in Paul's letter actually comes from Sinaiticus II character.
Okay.
Which, let me just finish my response, Jonathan. As you would understand, I did not interrupt you when you were speaking. You can at least offer me the common decency there. I look here at Aleph 2, which would be from the 7th century. So when you say that Paul wrote this, what recension or what version of Paul's work are you appealing to historically that you can validate?
So you're contesting that Paul wrote this text?
No, contesting what recension you're basing your argument upon.
Wait. So your argument is basically that Paul did not assert the crucifixion. Am I understanding that correct?
That is not my argument. I'm asking you a foundational question. You're appealing to a source, which is this document, 1 Corinthians 15. I'm asking you, what recension or form of that text are you appealing to?
I'm appealing to, this is the consensus view of what 1 Corinthians says. I mean, there's no textual critic at all. I mean, there's no text fragment of which I'm aware where this relevant section appears where that block of text is not present. And indeed, you do even need this particular. So even if we assume, which no credible scholar would subscribe to, the proposition that this is a later interpolation into the text by a later scribe, even if we were to assume that, I mean, there's so many passages throughout Paul's letters that affirm the crucifixion that it's undeniable that Paul affirmed the crucifixion. So, and it's also undeniable that Paul was personally acquainted with Jesus' brother James and his close disciple Peter. And Paul also even represents what he's now preaching concerning the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection of Christ to be consistent with what's already been preached by those individuals. And because he says in verse 11 of that same text, whether then it was I or they, so he preached and so he believed. And so if Peter and James, who were eyewitnesses to Jesus, asserted the crucifixion, then that's very strong historiographical evidence that actually happened, right?
Okay, brilliant, Jonathan. So I listened to you and you said you had to make a couple of assumptions, right? So I'm happy that you're going to appeal to the consensus of scholarship. I guess I could appeal to the Sanhedrin and their consensus on Jesus being a sorcerer, but I prefer not to do that because I prefer to ask questions. So it would seem to me that you don't have any idea about the date of the ascension that you're appealing to. You don't want to acknowledge that you have no first century extant sources on this. Would you be willing to accept that on camera, that you don't have any extant first century sources of 1 Corinthians 15?
So you're, that's absolutely correct. There are no first century sources of any New Testament. There's no first century manuscript copies of any New Testament document. So that's not contested.
So how do you know then that this chapter goes back to the first century? Help educate me.
Well, you're equivocating two things. You're equivocating the original autograph and what the original autograph said, and the manuscript copies of that original autograph. Obviously, we don't still have the original autograph, but the discipline of textual criticism is attempting to determine what the original manuscript said. And I don't know of any scholar that would assert that 1 Corinthians 15 was an interpolation into the text of 1 Corinthians. Even on the assumption or the hypothesis that you're correct on this, which I don't think any textual critic would back you up on it, but even if you're correct, I mean, you surely wouldn't deny that all of the references in Paul to the crucifixion are later textual interpolations, would you?
So, Jonathan, what I'm doing is simple, right? So we've asked you to bring like primary evidence. You've come on, you've put the secular historians aside. You've said 1 Corinthians 15. So I'm sticking to 1 Corinthians 15. We can look at other passages, and that's reasonable. But here is the question. When you say to me with certainty, Paul wrote this in these words, I'm sure that you have an evidence for this, right? So if you tell me, well, textual critics say that, okay, how do textual critics arrive at that conclusion? And what is their level of certainty that Paul, in his own hand or an amanuensis, wrote it on his behalf? Like, what is the method that they're using? Because it would be easy for me to say textual critics agree that there is more than one hand to Paul's letters, which is the consensus. So perhaps it is, I could be wrong. Maybe you can inform me just a little bit about the method that the scholars have used to arrive at this 50s dating that you've given it.
I mean, you're adopting a position that no scholar in the field would accept. I mean, are you contesting that Paul wrote these words in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8?
I am contesting that. I don't know if Paul himself or a scribe wrote it or someone writing in his voice, as what an amanuensis would do. So my position, just to be clear, Jonathan, my position is reasonable. I'm not assuming that Paul did write it, and I'm not assuming that he didn't write it. I'm asking you, what is the evidence he did write it? Surely the difference there exists, yes?
I mean, the evidence for Paul's authorship of 1 Corinthians is overwhelming. I mean, it's one of the undisputed letters of Paul. You accept that?
Can you give me some kind of evidence that you're appealing to?
That Paul wrote 1 Corinthians? Absolutely.
No, 1 Corinthians 15, as you've put it.
Well, I mean, there's evidence of the textual unity of the book. I mean, even Bart Ehrman would accept that Paul wrote all of 1 Corinthians. I mean,
there's a unity in the later.
Bart Ehrman would dispute the unity of 2 Corinthians, but he would absolutely not contest the unity of 1 Corinthians. The evidence for that is very, very strong.
So the unity of thought is what indicates it must be from the same author? So when textual critics say then that there is not a unity of thought in John's Gospel, do you then say, okay, that's an evidence it was not written by an inspired author?
So I mean, tell me what's your methodology for determining whether Paul wrote this section or not? I mean, what? I mean, tell me a single scholar.
I find it's a little bit strange because Jonathan, if you will forgive me, I actually asked you, how do you get to this early dating? And all you've done, you didn't answer the question. And then you put back the question to me, how do I date it? But I'm not the one making the claim.
But you're the one that's in the fringe position.
No, my position is it reasonable to say, I don't know if Paul wrote it himself or if a scribe wrote it on his behalf. I don't know. I was not there. You're the one making a claim in history, 50s. So I'm saying, Johnson, please help me. I'm a Muslim, help me.
Obviously, Paul used scribes. I mean, there's no one contesting that Paul used scribes. He sends greetings from his scribe in Romans, for example. So no one would contest that. But you nonetheless would accept that Paul affirmed and asserted the crucifixion of Jesus, right?
Well,
Can I
depends
just say
on-
something, Ijaz? Ijaz, can I just say something? Sorry, because we're streaming away from what we're talking about here.
No problem.
Okay. See, you're assuming what Paul says is true. You're assuming Paul never lied. You're assuming Paul never made mistakes, and what he said must have actually have happened, or he may have thought it happened, or he may have heard it may have happened, and it may not have. May have. Okay. We did start this whole stream by saying this. Please don't come on and tell us what Paul said. Yeah, we're going to do a whole stream on whether Paul is a reliable source of information. We're going to do a whole stream on whether the New Testament is a reliable source of information. We've been very generous with the New Testament so far. Yeah, so we're not testing whether or not did Paul, the textual criticism, the higher criticism. We're not even going there right now. Like I said, we're just testing the claim of the Christian with regard to crucifixion. Looking at, and you talk about these secular scholars. These are the secular scholars that Christians bring to us. These are the three names that reel off the tongue as soon as we start talking about the crucifixion and its historical nature. So don't act like we've brought the scholars. The scholars are presented to us. We've just batted them out of the park, right? So now what we're doing, we're looking at the New Testament and what the New Testament says and whether that goes along with historical lines. Yeah. Now, whether Paul thought there was a crucifixion or not is irrelevant because Paul wasn't there. Paul's just reporting hearsay. That's all it is. Anyway, that's my point.
So when you say that Paul is reporting hearsay, I mean, he's someone that's much closer up to the facts than Josephus and that you mentioned. And
was he there?
No, he wasn't a witness to Jesus.
So he's not reporting his own testimony.
He's speaking with people who are, which means that he's close up to the facts.
Just 1 second.
We don't know what he's reporting.
Hamza, if I may, I just have a question for Jonathan. Paul was persecuting Christians according to your belief, Jonathan. I would assume you agree with me on that.
Right.
And what did it take for Paul to affirm that Christ was the God Messiah? What did it take?
Well, Jesus appeared to him on the road to Damascus.
So I would imagine that he would have heard Christians and Jews generally speaking about Jesus, passing through their villages and towns, the crucifixion, and none of that seemed to convince him. What convinced him was a physical, allegedly, or personal encounter. So when we appeal to the historicity of something, Paul's experience is not grounded in history, as you would agree. It's not something he was convinced by. He became convicted in his faith only after a personal encounter. Now, to be clear, I've met many Christians who said that Jesus have appeared to them, but I don't operate under the assumption that their claim is based in factual history or some kind of objective form of experiential validation. So on this point, I think what we're trying to get to is even Paul himself did not come to believe on a historical ground. He came to believe on a personal encounter ground. And I think that differs with the topic that we're presenting today and with the claim that you're making. Is it perhaps, do you have some kind of evidence that Paul was convicted first in his faith with historical evidence, or was it that he was convicted first with the personal encounter as he gives it?
The point is, though, that most this particular text that I mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15:3-8 is regarded by many scholars, as you know, I'm sure, to be a creedal tradition that Paul's passing on to the Corinthian Christians. And I think there's debate about as to exactly when Paul received that creed. Some scholars say that he may have received it 3 years after his conversion during his visit to Jerusalem in Galatians 1. I don't think the evidence for that is conclusive. But in any case, it mentions, he says in verse 11, whether it was I or they, so we preached and so ye believed. And so he seems to be representing his message, which includes the crucifixion, as being consistent with what's already been preached by Peter, James, the 12, etc. And we also know independently that the Corinthian Christians were acquainted with the preaching of Peter, because in 1 Corinthians 1, they say, Paul chides the Corinthians for having divisions and factions in their midst. Some say, I follow Cephas, others Apollos, others I follow Paul, others I follow Christ, and so forth. And so the Corinthians were acquainted with Peter's preaching, and Paul seems to be representing this proclamation of the crucifixion as being consistent with what's already been preached by these apostles. And furthermore, in the book of Acts, which is written by a traveling companion of Paul by the name of Luke, he was
1 second, Johnson. I think we're getting a little bit away here. Yeah. So your source that that the church in Corinth, which is not in Judea to be sure, so they would not have been witnesses to the crucifixion, is Paul himself in that same letter that you're appealing to. That seems not to be an independent source. So it would be easy for Paul to say, yes, you're acquainted with Peter. Obviously you are. And he writes this to the church in Corinth. And that is your evidence. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, Paul represents his message being consistent with that of Peter and James and 12, and
So
it
it
and
still
also
comes back
indicates
to
that he's
Paul in the
received
end.
this, right? He's passing on what he's also received, which indicates that the Paul's belief about the crucifixion reflect that held by the other apostles, in
Well,
particular.
that's what Paul says, right? So the question comes back: how do you establish credibility? How do you establish his words as being
Oh, that's
historical?
another stream. That's another stream.
It is. But
So we're gonna
Jonathan,
do
if
Paul.
possible, we could follow up on this. And I think that you've been quite respectful in this
Yeah,
stream so
definitely.
far.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Um,
I will say,
but-
Jonathan.
Could I just ask a very brief question?
Okay.
Sure.
Hi, Jonathan. Just a very brief question, because obviously I'm not as into the sort of academia of this. So let me try and understand. So you're referring to Paul, and as far as I know, Paul wasn't a witness to the crucifixion. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So from that then follows. So then you say that he was relying upon the testimony of the 12. Yeah. So of those disciples who have written gospels testifying to the fact that Jesus was crucified, that then we could refer to check his understanding was the same understanding as theirs.
Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question. You're asking which of the four gospels.
So what I'm asking is that obviously what we're looking for are, because the claim made to Muslims when they're interacting with Christians is that there are eyewitness testimonies, so people who saw the crucifixion. And when we ask for the eyewitness testimonies, what we get are people who are writing about other people telling them that the crucifixion happened, which is clearly not an eyewitness testimony. It's a recording of another person's testimony. Do you understand? So, for example, in a court of law, they would call that hearsay. I'm not saying that we should have that same standard or stringency when applying our discussion, but what as the claim that's made to Muslims, and I'm happy if that claim is maybe downgraded to maybe, okay, we have a collection of writings of what people around the time said had happened, which is different from saying we have eyewitness testimony. So for me as a Muslim, when I discuss this topic, the thing that always often thrown at me is that we have eyewitness testimony. Now, for me, that means we have writings from people who saw the crucifixion with their eyes and they wrote it down, and that's what we have presented before us. So even though you bring Paul, I don't think he doesn't fall into that category. So you said that his testimony was the same as that of the 12, but I'm not aware of the other 12 all having written gospels. So how would you verify what that statement that you made, that what Paul says is what the other 12 were saying? How would you do that?
So 2 points there. One is that Paul claims that he's claiming to the Corinthians, who wouldn't be in a position to know this, that what he's preaching concerning the crucifixion is consistent with what's already being proclaimed by the apostles, and particularly Cephas and James and so forth. And so we have to then evaluate and adjudicate, okay, so what is the best explanation for that claim? And secondly, you're actually factually incorrect that none of the 12 wrote gospels. At least John the apostle, for example, wrote the fourth gospel that we find in the New Testament. And he was one of the people who was actually a direct witness to the crucifixion. In fact, Jesus from the cross entrusts the care of his mother Mary to the beloved disciple. And from that, the beloved disciple takes him to his own home. And that's the same individual as author of John's Gospel. I think there's very compelling evidence to support and substantiate.
Jonathan, just to disagree with you there, Polycarp says he knew John. He narrates from the Johannine epistles, but never the Johannine Gospel, not one statement. So it's kind of funny that you would affirm that the historical Christians knew that John wrote the Gospel, but the one guy who was his direct student never quotes him from his Gospel, even though it would have been existent at this time and fairly well read. So I think it's more of a misnomer to say that John wrote John. I get that you have your arguments for that, but I just think it's unusual that Polycarp, of all people, never quotes that gospel once.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the early church father witness to that. It wouldn't be my primary argument, although I do think it's a significant part of the evidence. But the Irenaeus does mention that John the Apostle wrote the Gospel of John from Ephesus.
And he gets that from Polycarp, who
Irenaeus
quoting
Polycarp, right, whom you just mentioned.
Right, and so Polycarp never quotes the Gospel of John. So the link that you're making is Irenaeus knew Polycarp. Polycarp knew that John wrote the Gospel, but that last part of the argument has not been demonstrated. It's an assumption.
It's not. I don't think that is conclusive on its own, but I think it adds to the cumulative
But you
evidence.
did appeal to Irenaeus.
When we do when we challenge Paul whether he's authoritative.
Can I just follow up one question, please? Is that all right?
Then I'll
So
make the
I just want to follow up something. Sure, sorry, Hamza. I'll let you carry on after that. I just want to follow up on the point. So what my question was, it wasn't really. I wasn't saying that none of the gospel writers had written none of the disciples had written anything down. I mean, you referred to Paul. What I'm saying is, were they witnesses to the crucifixion? And obviously, there's, you said the 12. So we have 12 people's possible writings that we could sort of all refer to. And you sort of, the thing that we understand from the narrative is that none of the disciples, in the narrative, in the sense that it records that all of the disciples forsook Jesus and fled. So they weren't present at the time of the crucifixion. And this is so that what you're saying to me sort of contradicts, as far as I'm aware, contradicts the narrative of them being witnesses to the crucifixion. But then you bring me, from the disciples that you could possibly bring me, you bring me John, and already Brother Giles has spoken about John. But obviously, different Christian scholars have given different identities for the writer of this gospel. Who are you aware of? I'm sure you must be aware. Could you tell us who the different possibilities that have been presented forward are, and why you would reject some and accept the others?
Sure. Richard Balcom, for instance, attributes it to John the Elder, whom he distinguishes from John the Apostle. I don't think there's a need for distinguishing between the two. I think John the Elder and John the Apostle are the same individual. However, even if Richard Balcom is correct on that, he still identifies him as the beloved disciple who claims to be a witness to the crucifixion. Ben Witherington takes another view, which is that it's Lazarus, because it says of Lazarus, see how he loved him. And other people like Bart Ehrman say it's anonymous, and we just don't know. We don't have any clue who wrote it. So I personally think that John the Apostle is the author. I think we can make a good argument for him being. For the author being the beloved disciple. I'll just run through one of them very quickly. And that is, if you go to John 18, verse 10, we read about Peter cutting off the ear of the high priest's servant. It says, and Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Now, John is actually the only gospel to mention the name of the high priest's servant. And the question then arises, okay, so how does John know the servant's name? Well, if we continue reading and we get to verse 26 and 27, it says, one of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, did I not see you in the garden with him? And so then another question arises, okay, so how does the author know that the individual who approached Peter was one of the high priest's servants? If we read verse 15 and 16 of that same chapter, John 18, it says, Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter stood outside of the door. So who is this other disciple that was known to the high priest? Well, if we go to John 20, verse 2 and 3, it says, speaking about Mary, so she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, so it's a disciple whom Jesus loved. And then it says in verse 3, so Peter went out with the other disciple and they were going toward the tomb. Also in John 19:26, it says, when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, woman, behold your son. And then in John chapter 21, verse 24, it says, speaking about the beloved disciple, who is identified as that disciple who is known to the high priest, this is a disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. So that then explains how the author came to know the name of the high priest's servant. Malchus is the only gospel that gives us that detail. So that's part of a cumulative argument.
Brilliant, Jonathan, on that explanation. So what you're saying is that you have to interpret the text to mean that it could possibly be John the disciple. The text itself does not plainly say that. Would you agree that it's an interpretative method you've used to come to that conclusion?
So I made an argument, and that's just one branch of the argument, but I made an argument for the author of John's Gospel being the beloved disciple, and then I could make additional arguments for identifying the beloved disciple as specifically John, the son of Zebedee. But irrespective of that case, nonetheless, the beloved disciple is, according to John's Gospel, a witness of the crucifixion of Christ.
But Jonathan, we're not told explicitly who that disciple is. I don't imagine that the early Christians sat down and tried to work it out. The point is, you don't have a consensus, not even by the church fathers, who even knew Polycarp, who was the student of John, testifying that John is the one plainly that wrote that gospel. So while I enjoy listening to you forming your argument, the historical reality is that the very person that should know this is Polycarp, and he does not testify that John wrote that gospel.
We can work it out by a process of elimination exactly who the beloved disciple is, because from the list of those that are present in some of the scenes, including cross-references with the synoptic gospels, he has to have either been Andrew, Peter, James, or John, and he can't be Andrew since Andrew is named in John's gospel. He can't be Peter.
Pause 1 second, Jonathan. This idea of the process of elimination, are you familiar with Michael Lacona's literary spotlighting theory?
Yes.
So in that theory, just correct me if I'm wrong, it is okay to leave off additional witnesses who would have been there if it does not serve the purpose of the story or that the author intends, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So your process of elimination is assuming that all the disciples that are mentioned there are the only disciples that are mentioned there. But as your own scholarship recognizes, just because they're not mentioned does not mean that other additional witnesses were there. So it seems a bit dubious to appeal to something that you're uncertain of in the first place.
But there's the point that's being made here is that there's a particular disciple who is unnamed and is called instead the disciple whom Jesus loved. And I'm showing so Andrew's named in John's gospel. Peter is mentioned, it appears in the closing chapter, along with the beloved disciple. James was martyred to be early to have written the gospel. We know from Acts 12, verse 1, James the son of Zebedee. And so by process of elimination, I think the best explanation is it was John, which is consistent with the patristic witness in the 2nd century. And notice that in the 2nd century, so you've got Irenaeus, who knew Polycarp, who was a disciple of John. You've got Tertullian of Carthage. You've got Clement of Alexandria.
Let's just pause here, Jonathan. You've gone back to Irenaeus and you've gone back to Polycarp. But again, they go back to the same source, Polycarp, and he does not say John is that disciple. So you have to make an assumption, a layered assumption, to get to your point, which I think does not make sense.
Would you say this is we kind of get the gist here of this, or do you want to carry on?
No, we'll end this now. Let her roll on. Jonathan, you'll definitely be invited back on the port. Can I just say this one thing?
Jonathan, sorry, Hamza, go on. I keep interrupting you.
It's just a quick one. First of all, could there be more than one author of John, Jonathan?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, so trying to tie things in historically is a bit of it irrelevant if there's more than one author, because he might know one part, but the rest might be written by an author who wasn't there. Fair enough?
Yeah, but although I think that we can...
And the second thing is, these secular historians, you actually concede they're not even gravy on the plate, yeah?
Sorry, say that again?
The secular historians you accept are not even gravy on the plate, yeah?
I think that their contribution to the evidence for Jesus, historicity, and crucifixion, etc., are negligible because they only confirm what the
Thank you. Not even gravy on the plate. That's all I want to say. Go on, Imran.
So I just really thank you, Jonathan, for your explanation. So the couple of things that I want to come to mind when you mentioned sort of you believe John as being one of the disciples that was there, is that there is a big disparity between the narrative that we see of the crucifixion that we see in John compared to the synoptic gospels. Which do you hold as being the truer version of events? How do you, because obviously even the statements that Jesus makes, even the spear in the side are sort of exclusive. The spear in the side is sort of exclusive to John. And we see sort of the statements that Jesus makes, where the last words on the cross, etc., are different. So for you as a Christian, when you're trying to sort of reconcile the difference in the narratives, and then we have the synoptics, and then we have John almost as an isolated, complete different with respect viewpoint, would you hold that as being the truer version of events, or would you say that the version of events sold by the synoptics is the truer version of events? What's your take on that? And the other thing I didn't understand, and you can maybe explain to me, is why would John, if he was the author, be calling himself the beloved disciple rather than referring to himself in the first person or even the second person?
Yeah, so on the first of these points about apparent contradictions in the passion narratives between John and the synoptics, we need to look at specific examples. I personally, having reviewed I've literally gone through every single example that Bart Ehrman's ever published on alleged contradictions, and I do not think that there are any contradictions in the passion narratives that we find between John and the synoptic gospels. I'll give you an example. This is one that is found in Bart Ehrman's book, Jesus Interrupted, which I personally think this one's his best example. So I'm not picking low-hanging fruit, but So this is to do with the day of crucifixion between the Synoptics and John's Gospel. As you know, the argument goes that the Synoptic Gospels present Jesus as being crucified on the eve of Passover, rather on the day of Passover, and John's Gospel changes the day to the eve of Passover, the 14th of Nisan, in order to have Jesus crucified at the same time as the Paschal lambs. And his argument is, so in Mark 14:12, it says, on the first day of unleavened bread, when he sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover? Whereas John 19:14 says, which is describing the same scene where Jesus is condemned to be crucified, it says, now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. So when we look at John more carefully, we see that he doesn't actually say that it was the day of preparation for the Passover, but rather he says it was the day of preparation of the Passover. And in fact, Mark uses that exact same term, but he also tells what it means. So in Mark 15:42, it says, when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath. So in other words, preparation actually means the preparation for the Sabbath. And furthermore, in John 19:31, it says, since it was the day of preparation, and so the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. So John actually agrees with Mark that it was a day.
Jonathan, this is going to go on and on. Let me just say something. Are you saying that the synoptics are in line with John historically?
Correct.
There's no historically errors, no?
Not on the Passion narrative, no.
No, in any of the narratives?
Not on the Passion narrative.
And in the other narratives?
I think that you can make a case. I think there's a handful of cases where I would make a case for examples of good faith errors.
So this would then tell us the historicity of those particular gospels if they're having different narratives about the same event.
So I make a distinction between deliberate distortions of fact and good faith mistakes.
All right, nice. All right, Jonathan, we'll call you back on when we do Paul and when we do the reliability of the New Testament, because I think what you said now, you're going to need that for then. For this particular thing, we're challenging the historicity of the crucifixion with regards to what the New Testament says, not whether or not who said it. So if Paul says something, it means nothing to us. If Mark said it, means nothing to us. It's whether the events described happened historically. That's what we're questioning, yeah? But thank you for rejecting the secular scholarship. That's fantastic. Paul, take care, Jonathan.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Message us on Facebook and we'll organise, set something else up, because I enjoyed that. Thanks a lot. Cheers,
All the best, Jonathan.
So we have our rule on the.
Can I just before everyone comes on, if I could just very briefly summarize. So it's very interesting, Jonathan's contribution, and I think Jonathan's contribution is something that people should understand and take on. So what he said was that the extra biblical historians that people refer to, you should not refer to them because they're negligible in terms of evidence. For me as a Muslim who's interacted with Christians, the number of people that I've spoken to who then will point to Josephus, etc., and say, look, we have extra biblical evidence. Hear Jonathan very well. He said it's negligible as a form of evidence. Mm-hmm. I don't think really we understood Paul wasn't an eyewitness, so therefore couldn't be described as an eyewitness to the crucifixion. And then obviously the issue with John, we spoke about the multiple authors and the fact that the narrative doesn't compare with the other synoptics. And so we have an issue with that as a historical document, not as a document you take on faith, but it has history. And that was just wanted to summarize very briefly.
Although I think I was going to defend it now.
Hello. All right. If we, I'm a bit conscious of time, but because we also got Jason's sort of appearing in the back chat, coming and going. He's probably having internet problems, but I'll bring him on as well. Jason Burns.
Oh,
Reverend Jason Burns. It says on his profile.
Color in the house. We like that.
So I am certainly in good company there with Jonathan.
Yeah.
With me.
Well, what we're going to try and do, because I feel like I don't want to veer off topic. So if you can sort of state your claim, Errol, and then we'll try and stick.
I'm going to make it really short. First of all, I haven't said hello to any of you in person before, and so I take this opportunity to say my hello to Hamza, Ijaz, who I met. I think I've seen a couple of times in Speaker's Corner, but didn't say hello. But Imran also, and Jordan. I'm glad to say hello to you for the first time. What I'm going to say is this. I really do not appreciate the format that we have here to deal with a very, very important subject area. Because essentially, even in the last 10 minutes that I've been listening to you, the number of fallacious arguments, historically inaccurate arguments that you're making is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Just in 10 minutes, I can count something like 5 or 6 major fallacious arguments or
We just
historical.
need one. We just need one, mate.
I'll just give one example. Just one.
Okay.
Yeah. Ijaz was talking to Sister Mary, who got on, I think, before Jonathan. And Ijaz asked a question. And the question was the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin tract. 2 points. One, the question that Ijaz asked was, so you take the fact of Jesus being referred to in the Talmud as a historical fact, but you don't take the conclusion that Jesus was a sorcerer as a historical conclusion. You can't get a more fallacious argument in any debate. Let me make this.
What is the fallacy there? Can you tell me?
Exactly. That's why I'm getting to.
So what fallacy has he employed?
Yeah, the fallacy is this. There is a clear distinction between what a basic fact is versus a complex conclusion. The basic fact.
What is the fallacy, though? Like, I'm sure you're familiar with fallacy.
Which is
what
I'm getting to. If you please,
No, like, is it a straw man? Is it a red herring? Is it?
If you please let me finish, and then you'll get what I'm saying. So there is a difference between a basic fact versus a complex conclusion. Jews, in seeing Jesus being crucified, they're not making any theological conclusion. That's a basic fact. You don't need a Jew to see it. It could be any Greek or whoever else. As long as they see someone killed to testify for it, you don't need to disagree much. As long as they're truthful, that's the only question you need to ask. Okay. Whereas when it comes to the complex conclusion as to whether they consider Jesus to be a sorcerer or not, you see that same conclusion in the Bible. In the Bible, the Pharisees accused Jesus of being motivated by Beelzebub. The same conclusion. Not motivated of God, but motivated of an evil spirit. In other words, it's not a non-biblical conclusion. The conclusion is wrong, but it's a complex conclusion. The conclusion is different to what Christians would come to purely because of theological stances people take. And so I could disagree entirely with a complex conclusion, yet take the simple attestation of a simple fact to be accurate. There's no problem.
Have you seen the whole stream?
No, I just the one question was asked.
Arul, no, you have to have the right premise here. Okay, so Mary brought the Mishnah, yeah, and she spoke about the herald for 40 days, saying that Jesus is going to be stoned and then hung on a tree. That was her historical evidence. So the question that needs to be asked: if this is to be accepted as an historical event, then this Jesus was stoned. Yeah. If this Jesus wasn't stoned, it's either not a historical event or is it referring to Jesus who we're referring to? Right? The conclusion is this. If you're going to say, because in the Mishnah it says Jesus was killed, then you have to accept he was stoned. If you don't accept he was stoned, why are you quoting this? Because you don't believe it's true. That's the whole point here. And that's the problem. When you don't hear a full stream, you come in halfway, think you've got a point, and the reality is you don't.
Hamza,
there was no fallacy.
I can only.
What was the fallacy? Could you remind me?
Be amazed by the fact of how you are deviating from the particular point that I'm trying to make. So there are 2 points made in regards to the 1 minute, please. Okay. There are 2 points made in regards to the Sanhedrin tract. Agreed. One of them was the claim of Jesus being stoned. If you only read the Sanhedrin tract carefully, you would have noticed this is the historical error that you're making. Nowhere does it say he was actually stoned. It actually only says he was declared to be stoned.
Okay.
So let's just pause here.
But apart from that, my main point there was, apart from that point about stoning, there was another point made, and that point is, if you're going to use the Sanhedrin tract as an evidence at all, when you disagree with the conclusion that Jesus was a sorcerer, how could you even use it? Was a challenge that he just posed. And there, Ijaz is nodding there. So Hamza, you might want to take the agreement there. In that particular point, leave aside stoning. The question was, can you use the tract, Sanhedrin tract, as an evidence when you disagree with the fact of the Jewish rabbis there saying Jesus was a sorcerer? And the answer is, yes, I can. Because claiming that Jesus was a sorcerer is consistent with New Testament in claiming that Jesus was motivated by Beelzebub and is a
calling people to idolatry.
All right, so hold on.
To idolatry.
It is a complex conclusion.
He says he was doing sorcery and calling people to idolatry. Was Jesus calling people to idolatry?
That's what the Jews thought. That's what the Pharisees thought.
The Jews thought he was calling to idolatry.
That's exactly what the Pharisees thought. They essentially thought that Jesus was misleading people in all sorts of different ways. Now, can I please put it this way?
So 1 second, Darren, hold on. You said I made a fallacy. What is the fallacy that I made?
Well, your argument was fallacious there.
But if it's fallacious, what is the fallacy that I made?
The logical assumption, the logical point, you thought it was logically accurate to say, if you disagree with the complex conclusion of a document, then you might also necessarily disagree with basic facts in the document. That's a lot.
What is the fallacy? Right? Like, what is it?
So,
you've accused me, because the way fallacies work is, if you say, okay, you've made a fallacious argument, this is the fallacy that you've committed, right?
Yes.
What you seem to be telling me is you've committed a fallacy, but I don't know what fallacy you committed. But I believe you committed one. So just say plainly, do you know the name of the fallacy or not?
It doesn't matter. We're not. Is this a discussion on who knows philosophy better, or is this a discussion on?
The thing is, hold on. I will. If you come to me and you say to me, I've done something fallacious, I need you to explain what was the fallacy employed, right? So clearly, just plainly here, you don't seem to know what the fallacy is. You can't explain to me what the form of the fallacious
another remarkably fallacious argument.
And I didn't interrupt you. You got to give me the time of day to do it as well. Remember, you said I nodded when you were speaking, so I was silent. Surely you can offer me the same courtesy. So, brothers, what we're seeing here is you've committed a fallacy, okay? What is that fallacy? I can't. But I disagree with your conclusion. So if you listen to what Arul, he said, this is a fact that happened. To the Jew writing in the Mishnah, everybody's writing there is taken to be a fact by, as Richard Borkham argued, the testimony of someone begs to be believed. That's the default. So do you understand? And let's just do this premise by premise, because you wanted to use fallacies and logic. The first premise is, did Mary agree that this was a reliable source we can go to? The question is to you. Did Mary agree?
I don't care. What I'm saying is, hold
on. So in other words, you don't care what Mary said, but you're here to defend her. And when questioned about what she said, you're not willing to defend her. In your own words, you don't care. So is it possible then that you have something to speak on the topic then? Because if Mary is irrelevant, that's your statement. But what is your point then? Get to your point.
So let me just do this. Can I please, even before we move on to anything else, make a very sincere suggestion? I think I've seen a couple of you already before, and the suggestion is this: is any one of you, or maybe two, is open to two debates back to back?
No.
So you can challenge us to debates at any time, but this
one second. Can you please give me the courtesy in listening to you?
This is my stream, and in my stream,
I appreciate, and that's exactly what I'm saying. The format isn't suitable. Can I please?
Hold on.
I feel like go on, Ijaz, and then I'll.
You'll tune in 2 more minutes.
And then you've chosen to tell us you don't like the format of the stream, so you're not willing to discuss those points. You want to do it at another time. So what you can do, Arul, is you can reach out to us in the chat or via email, and we would love to, set up a debate. That's not an issue, but you're here obviously for the challenge that we put out. If you're not here for the challenge and you're here to disagree on the format or whatever the case may be, then perhaps you can try another time. So just nod if you're willing to speak to the requirements of the stream. If not, God willing, we can bring someone else in, but we want to stick to the purpose of the stream.
Yeah, so we got Jonathan waiting in the back chat, Errol. So I think from my understanding,
give me 2 minutes.
From my understanding, you've come on, you've backed up Mary's point, and then you said to Ijaz he made a thing, but I haven't yet. I'm still waiting to sort of hear your main claims. I don't know if you're able to sort of piece that together. Just be interested to know what your main claim is about the historicity of the crucifixion.
Okay, so I'm going to make a minor point here, and I'm going to ask. No, if you please give me the courtesy, yeah. So I assume you all three, maybe at least two, made this suggestion that the Babylonian Talmud says that Jesus was stoned. Let me read to you the excerpt from the Babylonian Talmud. It says,
why are you going to read from the Babylonian Talmud?
What's that? On the
Why are you going to read from this Talmud? I don't understand. Why are you reading from this book?
Can I please make a point at all?
No, but I want to understand the point of your point. What are you trying to, what will this prove?
Can I please make a point at all?
That's what we're waiting for, I think.
So if Hamza wouldn't interrupt me, please. If Hamza wouldn't interrupt me, please. It says, on the eve of the Passover, Yeshu was hanged. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald went forth and cried, "He is going forth to be stoned." So it was declared, they had decided that they were going to stone, but then they eventually ended up hanging him. That's the record that we have. So to claim that Jesus was stoned is an inaccurate statement. But
then, look, it's a claim that we didn't say that, did we? The Mishnah was brought up by Mary. Okay,
I wasn't here to defend Mary. I was here to talk about
it to you. So I'm going to explain it to you. The Mishnah was brought up by Mary. Yeah, she was the one who brought it as her historical evidence that the Jews believed this thing happened. Okay. But when you look at like you said, the herald went forward for 40 days saying this man has done sorcery and this man is calling people to idolatry, and then he'll be stoned to death and hung on a gibbet. Yeah. Now, either that particular statement in the Mishnah is not historical or it's referring to somebody else. Now, from what I've read, it's referring to somebody else. Another Jesus, long time before this particular event. Now, you can pull your face. Maybe you weren't aware of this. I'm just reading it today. Yeah. And the funny thing was Mary brought it up. So the point here is, I'll give you his name. Listen, Arul, I'll give you his name.
So in other words, you won't let me speak.
Arul, Google is your friend. Check up Joshua Ben Pendera, who this happened to.
So
Joshua. Right. So the point is this.
This is
this. Arul.
Before Jordan
was brought forward as evidence. And you're quoting exactly what Mary quoted. I don't know why, because we've already determined it's not historical.
So if I could make a suggestion, crucifixion of Jesus and resurrection are extremely fundamental to the Christian belief.
Agreed.
I'm quite glad that you're picking that point up as a point of discussion. Can I please challenge one or more of you to a debate?
Send an email. That's like I said, that's already been asked and answered.
Back to back. One on Jesus's crucifixion and resurrection.
We can discuss the details via email. The purpose of this, Jordan, if you will.
Yeah, I think Errol, I'm muting you. I'm not.
Can I just make a point very briefly? So I think the point I wanted to make. So it's really, thank you, Errol, I appreciate you coming and giving us your thing. But what we didn't really see was you presenting evidence for the crucifixion. What you came really was to talk about the format and how you thought Mary was, made to agree, maybe falsely represented in your perspective in terms of using an evidence that you sort of tried to use again. So it wasn't really you presenting what we'd like you to do, and you can do this if you want. What is your evidence that you can produce that will confirm that the crucifixion happened as a historical event?
So you
referred to the mention. Sorry, go on.
If I'm not mistaken, he did say it was a minor evidence, so he does not even consider it himself to be something major.
Absolutely. So
is there
that's
a major
really what
evidence?
would be useful.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
The purpose of the conversation.
Absolutely, this is the whole point. Now, in the Mishnah, it also mentions that after the trial of the Jesus, 5 of his disciples were also tried. did that actually happen in the narrative? There's no mention of the herald that went forth in any of the four Gospels. And this is quite a telling thing. For 40 days, there is a person preaching that this person is going to be stoned. Let's forget their conclusion, the complex conclusion about who he was and everything. But we find nowhere in the New Testament narratives, in the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who people present, even like yourself, I've heard you and speak as eyewitness testimonies of anyone going forth and pronouncing that this man will be killed by stoning anywhere at all. And so it doesn't really fit. So it doesn't fit with the narrative. So either something is missing from the Gospels, if you're using this as historical evidence, or the historical evidence doesn't match somehow in another way. So, and the evidence that you're referring to also talks about the trial of 5 of his disciples, and it names them. None of the names are the names of any of the 12 that are mentioned. And I think it's really interesting that you're sticking to this. I think it would be nice for you as obviously as a Christian who preaches a lot, and you're at Speaker's Corner and you're sort of well known. Why don't you give us, from your perspective, what you think is the strongest evidence for the historicity? So not a faith-based conclusion. I know people can make any conclusion like, but for the historical reliability of the fact of Jesus being crucified as we believe. What would you give? Forget what Mary said. What would you give as that?
So the second point of debate would be
Oh my God!
Muhammad.
Next.
Sorry, Errol. It was. I know it may look.
That's a shame, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's a shame.
Imran, he completely ignored it and was just waiting to ask.
Completely.
Yeah.
But this is for me, this is like a massive alarm bell. So everything that happened, he tried to make an accusation of, a fallacy, couldn't name the fallacy. Didn't really realize that the Talmud also, the oral tradition written down in the Mishnah has other facts that contradict. The fact that the narrative between the Mishnah account and actually the New Testament, it completely, there's nothing mentioned in the Gospels about a herald going forth and him announcing these things. So it doesn't match together anyway. It's completely irrelevant. He says that it was a minor evidence. So we said, okay, let's put all that aside. Let's disagree about that. Why don't you present your most strongest evidence for why you believe the crucifixion was? I mean, we completely gave him that opportunity. We turned off, pressed my mute button, and he didn't take it.
It was interesting coming on to a challenge, to offer a challenge. It was a. I've never seen Errol before. I don't know. I wasn't aware he's a Speaker's Corner person, but yeah, I didn't really get
about.
Sorry, Jason Burns has left the building, but we have a guy called Mike. So Jason, if you're there, come on and.
It's not the Mike, is it?
Sorry.
It's not the Mike, is it?
Was there a mic on last time? Wasn't there?
There was a Mike who came on and made 2 points that were completely irrelevant from the beginning.
Well, maybe he's gone away and done some.
Third time,
go on, Ijaz, you're on mute at the moment.
Sorry, new mic, it's really confusing sometimes.
Expensive kit.
It's like giant at my face, and I forget to turn off the mute button on my real. Not the smartest person in the room, clearly. We had agreed generally to an hour and a half. How much longer do you guys want to suggest we give this stream? Because what's the length of time that we're looking at here?
Yeah, I was thinking with one more person, I guess. I mean, if Jason came on now, we could let him straight in, but we do one more and then.
Let's test Mike.
So should we say 10 more minutes and then we'll.
Can we do it until 11? Sorry, it'll be.
It's 11:30
midnight.
Okay, so can we go to no? I may be mistaken. Let's go to 11:40 then, if that's the case. So 10 more minutes, as you guys said. Yeah. I can't count. I'm thinking in my head, what's going on? Okay, yeah.
All right, here's Mike.
All right.
Hello, welcome, Mike.
Hey, gentlemen. Thanks for.
It's the same, Mike.
Hey, Jazz. Me and you are good buddies.
I hope so.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make a brief comment. Won't be long. In my opinion, about just real quick, the Babylonian Talmud. As you know, in the Gospel records, Jesus, they did attempt to stone him on several occasions. They did consider him committing a type of sorcery or working for the devil. I would just say that we're looking at sort of the enemy's testimony. So I don't expect it to find this exact testimony in the Gospels. The way it reads, it says that they were basically considering what to do with him. they were considering stoning him, but they didn't attempt to do that. And what happened was, it says, but since nothing was brought forward in his favor, he was hanged on the eve of Passover. So I just wanted to make that point. There is a way to harmonize that text.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Mike. Just to respond to that point, so one of the principles of historiography is discontinuity, right? And so it does not cohere that the Jews had decided 40 days in advance and sent out a herald announcing that he has been tried and stoned, but does not mention, that, there was the meeting of the Sanhedrin and that is where the decision was taken, or that there was even a trial. So it seems like you're trying to harmonize two things which give no inclination that they can be harmonized. So at what point would you say, because they don't say multiple times he was deemed guilty and multiple times we tried to stone him. It says that they called out a judgment 40 days in advance.
Well, they didn't. Yeah, I'll wait till you finish. Go ahead.
And what I would mention here is that one of the principles of historicity is that we actually trust the judgment of people who are not believers, because it's possible that they might, in their disagreement, say something, and so they would not be advocating on behalf of the Christians then. So yeah, I agree with you that going to the Jews is a brilliant resource to go to, but we don't again see the narrative being coherent here. Is there a particular point of the narrative that you find coherent?
But the gospel accounts mention the stoning, and in other words, they attempted to stone him several occasions, then mention his sorcery, then mention its apostasy, that basically taking him away from either the Roman Caesar, the Roman emperor, or the God of Israel, because Jesus, as you know, said, well, the law says this and I says this. So I see consistency, but I don't know why you wouldn't see consistency.
What is the consistency here? Because the text, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Hamza is here, Dr. Imran is here, even
Sure.
Jordan can read the text for you. At what point does it say in the text that it's referring to a judgment that the New Testament authors, for example, knew of? So is there some one particular judgment under which Jesus was meant to be stoned and wasn't? Could you perhaps point me to that?
Ijaz, are you asking if they intended to stone? I just mentioned they did attempt to stone him.
I'm asking because what you're saying is we can validate that he tried to be stoned on multiple times and he wasn't, right? But the claim in the Mishnah is that the judgment was given 40 days in advance. Is there at any point in which the Jews come to Jesus in the Gospels and say, now it's time for your judgment, let us stone you because you committed this blasphemy?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Well, that's exactly my point is that he had a 3-year ministry. So it's not unreasonable to consider. So they've been meaning to kill him for years.
Consider. I'm looking for a clear-cut evidence that they say, okay, we pronounce this judgment on you. Because clearly, if you're familiar with the trial, they need to have a trial before they pronounce judgment, right? So at what point did they have a trial before his alleged death in which it was pronounced 40 days before Passover that he was meant to be stoned?
So Ijaz, you know in the gospel records that they tried to stone him and he got away. In other words, there was no trial there.
But those are ad hoc. Those are ad hoc events. This one is saying that there was a trial, and he was meant to be stoned 40 days later.
Oh, sure. Well, that's easy. I mean, I assume that they had several meetings and sort of trials in the sense that the high priests got together.
That's the problem. Assumption. I don't want an assumption if you're trying to demonstrate the historicity of something, right? So, do you have some kind of clear-cut, plain evidence that we can perhaps see?
Ijaz, when you're reading each documents. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Brother, yes, Jason, we can hear you. We do have another Christian on with us at the moment, and we would like to give Mike his full time, but just give us a minute.
We've lost Jason. He might be back in a bit.
Anyway, I don't want to focus too much on that. I just think there is consistency, as I mentioned, the stoning, the sorcery, and the apostasy. Whether again, the gospel isn't recording the enemy's testimony. It's possible that they had a trial of some sort and 40 days before. So yes, that is an essential agreement, but there are consistencies.
Hold on, but you say essential agreement, and then you say it's a possibility and it's an assumption.
Well, I'm saying there are clear consistencies, Ijaz, and there's something we just don't know.
So the consistency is the Jews wanted to kill Jesus, and the Mishnah mentions that they wanted to kill Jesus, basically.
Well, the consistency is the sorcery, the stoning, the apostasy, and the fact it was hung. I mean, that basically there's a lot of consistency with the gospel narratives.
But there is no core consistency with the very claim from the Mishnah that a judgment was pronounced.
We don't have that testimony. Yes, we're ignorant of that.
That's
not a problem. because you're saying it, you can't say it didn't happen. I can't say it did.
Mike,
just saying-
you accept it could be a different Jesus?
Do I accept it could?
Could it be a different?
I've looked at this particular text. So the consensus is no, it is about Jesus. Could it have been about someone else? Sure.
So it could have been.
Sure.
And why do you reject that? Other opinion?
Because of the criterion of consistency, and I just would have, and that'll just, I don't want to focus too much on the this particular point, but so let me just say, and it'll feed into the.
Mike,
Hold on one second. Let me find it. Okay, so here are my 8. I'm a layman, right? So if I'm looking at all the evidence, this is the evidence so far.
Hold on.
I would
Mike,
agree. This is
Mike,
the historical evidence. Okay.
I just want to pause for a second here. Are you moving on to a separate claim, or are you continuing with
We
this
can
claim?
continue on that, but we're just going in circles.
But I just asked you a question.
Could I make one point?
You're saying,
That's okay.
okay, but Hamza, you're saying it could be. Sure.
No. I said, why do
That's a
you
trick
reject your opinion?
That's a trick question. Could it be? Sure.
It's a valid question.
Could it be about him, Hamza? Could it be about Jesus? Yes or no?
No. Could it be about? It could be, or it couldn't
Okay,
be.
thank you. Okay, so we'll go in circular reasoning. I mean,
Right,
it's
but the
going
claim is
nowhere.
no. But the claim is no. For me, the historical doesn't add up anyway. But the Jesus of Pandera, why couldn't it have been him?
Give me the facts, CJ. Let's discuss the facts
Well,
around it.
sorry. So you've dismissed it. So you must know the facts.
Hamza, you asked me if it was possible. I said yes. How am I dismissing it?
No, you said you've looked at this opinion and you've rejected it. So I'm trying to understand.
No, that's not what I said. You're putting words in my mouth. I said I looked at the
I gotta be
consensus.
honest, that's what I heard as well.
I heard it. I said I looked at the consensus of views, whether it was about someone else or about Jesus, and the consensus view it was about Jesus.
So you didn't
Another,
yeah, but obviously that's going to be about Jesus because you want it to fulfill what you believe. Obviously,
Hamza, that's fine.
Can I make
That's fine.
a point on that, if that's okay? Mike, can I ask you a very quick question, if that's okay? So I'm also a layman. So as a non-Christian looking at this evidence that you've presented or has been presented, I think one of the things when I've looked at it is that I don't see anywhere in the New Testament narrative of this herald who, not for 1 day or 2 days, but for 40 days, was
Why would
announcing
the
and
gospel writers?
pronouncing.
The gospel writers are on the
Sure.
outside. Why would they?
So
report?
Well, I'm going to ask that question in a moment.
Yeah.
So,
what the
if you let
herald
me
not
finish
be
my point,
announced?
Mike, it'd be useful.
Well,
So
we're not-
the herald obviously is not announcing in a room. He's going out into the public and announcing that this man is going to be stoned, and for 40 days, not for a short time, but for 40 days. And additionally, I mean, the thing that is mentioned is that after this person is killed, there are 5 other disciples, his 5 disciples, that are killed, and they're named.
Where do you
And none
see
of
that?
those
Is that
names
in
are-
Babylonian Talmud or separate in the Talmud?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure, but they're mentioned. I'll give you a reference
Because
if I can find it.
there's the told at Yusha. There's the Babylonian Talmud. I'm just wondering what source because I don't see that in this particular text with the Babylonian Talmud.
Okay, I'll find the source of that. But so let's leave the 5 disciples that I mentioned, because obviously I can't give you a source now, and you've asked me for that. So I will provide a link for that can be sort of accessed later. So I'm not going to mention those now, but specifically the idea that there was a herald who was announcing for over 40 days that this person was going to be stoned. This is not mentioned in any of the narratives that we see in the New Testament. And for me, when I'm trying to harmonize, that sounds like quite an important event of an individual going around announcing this is going to happen.
Who announced it?
They didn't.
The herald.
Sorry.
Who announced it? Who are you claiming made this announcement?
Herald.
Who's the
So
herald?
this is what a herald does. So herald would be. Well, what I'm trying to do is, because what you've done is you said that you've tried in your mind you feel that the sources can be harmonized. Yeah.
Well,
So you're saying that the
did
mission.
you acknowledge some of the consistencies that I addressed or no? It just seems one-sided. Like you don't.
No.
really-
I'll tell you. So the first thing is you mentioned a trial before the trial, and I don't see a primary trial occurring before the trial that's mentioned in the New Testament anywhere else in the New Testament. I see arguments between people are making assumptions and then picking up stones to stone Jesus. I see that in the narrative, but I don't see a trial before any of those events occur.
You see the sorcery or the apostasy? Could you relate?
The sorcery claims. I mean, all of the prophets of God that came were accused of being sorcerers, etc. I also believe that was, that's one thing I agree with you on, but I don't see this trial before the trial. The other thing that I don't see is this herald, because the herald is someone who would go out and announce to the people that this person is going to be stoned, etc., and not for a short time, for 40 days. I mean, it's quite a significant event, but we don't see any of that within the New Testament now. So, from your perspective, why would you think that might be?
Well, they if you read the gospel narratives, there's several attempts of his life. There's Jesus even records that he knew that they wanted to kill him. So there must have been some herald or some sort of
brilliant. Mike, if I may ask you here, so were the Jews in habit of announcing 40 days in advance that they did not have a guy in what do you call it? They didn't arrest him, they didn't have him imprisoned. So they're telling him, hey, 40 days in advance, we're going to kill you. And that seems reasonable to you, just to be clear.
Sure. Yeah, we know that they wanted to kill him, so I don't see why it's unreasonable.
Again, they don't have him detained or imprisoned, but they're publicly going around saying, hey, in 40 days, we kill this guy. Yeah. How do they know in 40 days they're going to kill him in advance? And they're saying this publicly.
EJ, can you say that like last close? Listen, can I just make one? We're going in circles about one. It's sort of like one piece of the puzzle. That's
but it's the one that you raised, right?
Puzzle you brought. It's a piece
okay. Yeah. But I didn't want to be cut off before the time. So, listen, it could be about Jesus. You're saying it couldn't. Okay, fine. But it could be. I think that I made a case that there are connections to Jesus. No. Was Jesus hung on a cross? Yes or no?
No,
he wasn't stoned or threatened to be stoned.
No.
There was no herald. Listen, you're implying that there was a trial 40 days before he was crucified. That's what you believe.
That's the only leg you have, because
that's your leg. Your leg. According to what you're saying, Mike.
I'm saying it doesn't say that.
Mike. According to what you're saying, you believe Jesus was put on trial 40 days before his crucifixion, and for 40 days it was let known throughout the town.
That's not an official trial. It's not an official. Jesus wasn't presented in some sort of official trial.
It wasn't
an unofficial trial.
Unofficial trial.
It's an unofficial gathering of the priests.
And did Jesus talk about this trial?
What's that?
Did Jesus refer to this trial that happened 40 years?
He referred to the decree that they wanted to kill him.
No. He because that's you. You use that as some kind of prophecy. We're talking about 40 days prior to his arrest. Yeah, okay. You believe that Jesus went through some kind of trial, but Jesus never mentions it to his disciples or nobody.
He is going forth to be stoned. It doesn't say he was put on trial. Where you read?
He wasn't put on trial. Jesus
wasn't officially put on trial prior to his.
So this herald, what's that based off then? How do you get someone to be accused of blasphemy, going to be stoned to death without a trial? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, that's what the gospel reports. His life.
No. That's what you believe. Your claim is this: he was sentenced to be stoned to death.
That he was
Mike, you believe, according to what you're saying, that he was sentenced without a trial to be stoned for blasphemy by Jews, which is completely against their law. That's what you're claiming.
Where do you say he was sent? It doesn't even say that in the text, Hunter. It just says a herald. All it says is a herald went forth. That's
What's a herald? Mike, maybe you don't understand. Do you know what a herald is?
Please tell me what a herald is.
No, do you know what a herald is? Is a question.
I assume it's an official ruling by the high priest or the chief leaders or Pharisees. Or
a herald is a person.
See, what I would say is a guy going around saying this guy is going to be killed.
Okay.
Letting the people know. You know, like a town crier.
Okay.
Hear ye. This man is done for sorcery and he's going to be stoned in 40 days, yeah?
Yes.
Right.
Why is it unreasonable?
Right. Well, it's unreasonable. I'll tell you why it's unreasonable to say that the Jews would sentence someone to death for blasphemy without a trial. That's unreasonable.
So why did they do it? In the gospel accounts, we have him being stoned.
They had a trial. Look, even for example, I don't want to really go into this, but even the trial that occurs in the Gospels goes against Jewish law. You can't put someone on trial at night. You can't do it in secret. If they plead guilty to blasphemy, you give them 24 hours to take back their blasphemy claim. This is Jewish law. Now, according to what the Gospels are teaching, is that the Jews ignored all that Jewish law.
This isn't Jewish law. This is Talmudic law.
Which is Jewish law.
No, well, Quranic law is different from rabbinic law. But anyway, guys, let me just
make
my point. And this is so. My position is this: I'm just a layman. And I would say this. There is no smoking gun for the historical crucifixion of Jesus. There are cumulative cases based on pieces, just like any fact of ancient history. Okay, so these are my 8 points of evidence.
Alhamdulillah.
Number one, and we can go through them. Number one, because these are independent records, whether they're eyewitness, even hearsay is a point of historical criterion used to discover what's historical and what's not. So maybe they're weak, but it's the cumulative case. Number one is the historical, the gospel records. Number two, it's a New Testament epistles, Peter, John, Peter and John. And I also include Paul. We can discuss that another time. Pre-Pauline creedal
scrutiny of Second Peter will collapse, and then you've not got Peter the Apostle. You got another.
No. First Peter is attested as written by
it's
Peter.
debated. It's actually highly debated. Marcus Buckman.
But this is another stream. This is another. Yeah. This is why we said, don't bring us the Gospels. Don't bring us Paul, because we know what they say.
So just let me finish my point, and then we can critique each one if we have time.
We don't have time, unfortunately, Michael. Just 1 second, Michael.
We might have season.
Mike, just 1 second. Jordan, how much time do we have left in the stream?
We're past time now, so I think
Mike, you've made your point.
Let me make 1 minute point, and then we can close. Is that fair?
Hold up, Mike. We allowed you to make your grandest point. We asked you multiple times
I told you that wasn't my grandest point. You guys kept talking.
But then you should have cut everything else and gone to directly what your greatest point
30 more seconds, Jordan, please.
Go on, quickly.
Okay.
30 more seconds for
Gospel records, number one. New Testament epistles, Paul, Peter, books of John. Number three, pre-Pauline creedal statements. Number four, early church fathers. Number five, non-Christian historical sources. Number six, consensus Q source of oral tradition that predates the gospel records. Personal experience. I can go on and on, guys, but listen, there are you can't say there's no evidence. And just like if I was to say,
we're saying it. There's no evidence, mate.
But I want you guys to put a video together of the historicity of Muhammad. I want to see, compare that to the.
We can do an equivocation later. Thank you for your time, Mike.
Yeah, so you made your point, Mike. Yeah. So,
Mike, we really appreciate you coming on, Mike. I think it was good. I think interesting that what he listed, because he talked about the Gospels, and obviously, we've spoken about this already extensively. And then he talked about the epistles, and even Paul, who wasn't an eyewitness. Then he talked about creedal statements, which we can come to. Then again, he pointed to historical evidence, outside of the New Testament, which we've already been through those. And then he talked about Q source and other things, and all the things that
your standard Christian.
Completely, and none of them really. It's interesting that everyone seems to have stuck with this Mishnah. Every single person seems to have stuck with this Mishnah. It's really fascinating, isn't it? That no one could bring anything else. I was surprised by that. Why would you stick to to something that was, I think the manuscripts are we were looking at them very late, and it doesn't match anything. Nothing matches. There was no. Now people are claiming there were true trials. There were multiple stoning attempts, so they couldn't catch him to kill him. Subhanallah. And then it's just I'm just
the announcement is going to be stoned to death in 40 days, and nobody knew.
Subhanallah.
Yeah.
And I think and I don't mean to sort of ridicule, because that's not my aim.
No, I know. But here's the amazing thing: you see, they reject all the apocrypha and all that because they find inconsistency. Yet they ignore the inconsistency in what they bring. In what supports their worldview. It's madness.
Okay, so are we going to do a part 4?
We have to.
You know what, guys? I got to say that this all started with a message to Hamza and having a little chit-chat back and forth. I did not think that we would be going into 4 sessions deep and still having people not bring evidence. Today has actually been quite revelatory for me. Because I've sat down and I'm thinking, okay, they've watched the first video, they've had the time to critique it. They've watched the second video, they've come on, they've got experience, they've been in the chat, they've spoken with us, they've developed their arguments, they know what sources they have, what they need to bring. So they've had all this time to prepare. And now they've turned up and they're repeating the same thing from the first episode. And we challenged them on it. So we challenged John McClatchy. He says the historical accounts that are not from the Gospels are negligible. Yes. This bloke just came on and said They're not negligible. They're actually one of 8 important sources. The Indian brother came on, and he didn't bother to speak on what Jonathan had to argue on the patristics. And Mike seems to have forgotten that I engaged Jonathan on the patristics, and he acknowledged, Polycarp did not quote the Gospel of John at all, and he's supposed to have known John. So we've gone through the patristic evidence, we've gone through the New Testament Gospels, we've gone through Paul's epistles, we've gone into some textual criticism, some higher criticism, some form criticism. We've looked at Jewish pre-trial methodology. So, brothers, we've gone and we've done all of this, and what have we seen? None of the Christians that seem to come on are in agreement with each other. And what I found brilliant, I forget exactly who said this, we don't have a smoking gun. We only have circumstantial collective evidence. Allahu Akbar. That is our claim, that you have no, that's what the Quran says, you have no certain knowledge. And when Jonathan came on, assumption and probability. When Michael came on, circumstantial. This is what we have been saying from day one. Our argument has not changed. So I'm actually, it's warmed my heart to see one claim on one video has spawned so many videos, so many challenges, and at the end of the day, they affirm exactly what we have said at the start. Subhanallah, I did not expect this outcome.
Wait until we go into textual criticism and high.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun for me, I got to tell you.
Inshallah. So, Ijaz, I know are you breaking fast very soon, are you?
Possibly.
So shall we? I mean, I got a couple of things to mention. The patrons. If you want to be a patron of EF Dawah, support the team. Go on to our face. Where is that on a YouTube description? That should be in the description of this video. Anis will put it in there. Your website, Ijaz, callingchristians.com.
Yes, and if possible, guys, I'm going to be on Zoom chat now with my friend Brother Mustafa and Brother Faisal, whom I think Brother Hamza knows, a brilliant da'i. You can check my my Twitter page or my Facebook page for the link to that Zoom chat, inshallah. And we want to go over some of the things I discussed with Hamza, Imran, and you as well, Brother Jordan. But brothers, if you're out there and you're listening, make sure that you're subscribed to EF Dawah. Make sure you're sharing those links. Please, brothers, in this month of Ramadan, it needs to be understood we are in an age where Muslims doing dawah is essential. We are an essential service. The salvations of your souls are an essential service. So please do not forget us in your du'as. Pray that Allah accepts what we do and that He gives us hidayah, He gives us wisdom, and He gives us sincerity. I must commend the 3 brothers. Brother Jordan, you are a fantastic host. Brother Darwin, I think you murdered a few people today. That might be illegal. And Dr. Imran, you were charming and wonderful with very salient points as well. I continue to be impressed by the 3 of you. May Allah reward you and preserve you all.
Yeah. I got to say, I was very impressed by the way you dealt with the lady, Mary, who was doing all sorts of gestures at you, and you kept your calm very well. So, and
I was happy that Jonathan spoke to me nicely. We don't have the best history, but at least we were able to engage each other on a one-to-one level. And I just found it was brilliant. He acknowledged the non-Christian sources are negligible.
I had to get
yeah, amazing. That should have been the closing statement, shouldn't it? We could have stopped the stream after that one. So we got a couple of streams coming up. One tomorrow, me and Abbas are discussing pornography, and probably why you shouldn't against it. And we have Farid Responds and the Pondering Soul coming on Monday evening to discuss apologetics.
And we're going to do part 4 of the crucifix. This particular.
Yeah, Jason Burns has been in and out of the back chat a lot of the evening. I think I think Abbas gave him his old internet. So he's not
in Ghana, though, isn't he? He's in Ghana or something.
Yeah, but we'll give Jason Burns one of those queue jump for part 4. If he turns up, he can get one of those ones you get at the airport. You jump the queue, so he'll be.
How long should we give them for part 4? How much research do they need to do?
Yeah,
well, we've given them 2,000 years. I don't think we can afford them any more time.
Yeah, Wednesday.
Well, interestingly, Sahih Luke sent us an email and he didn't turn up today. So I guess he's still looking for that email, guys. Hashtag Sahih Luke is looking for his email.
Are you free Wednesday, Jazz?
I'm free every day, Hamza.
Right.
Inshallah, yes, Wednesday I should be free, inshallah.
All right,
So
we'll set it up straight after this stream. I'll put the Wednesday. What night? Do we do the same time again? Is it
I think
9?
do 10 o'clock this time. 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. All right, 10 o'clock
Okay,
on
alhamdulillah.
Wednesday.
I won't be eating my cheesecake then.
You gotta share with us, man. Come on. I saw Dr. Imran looking hungry for that piece of cheesecake. He knows I love cheesecake too. Brothers, it was brilliant. May Allah reward you all.
Ameen, inshallah.
Praise be.
I mean, Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, viewers, for tuning in, inshallah. Go and
Assalamu
find
alaikum, everybody.
go get your Christian friends, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.